November 12, 1937. 8 men sat tied in a slaughterhouse near the Harlem River. Earlier that week, those same men had tortured and killed a 19-year-old boy just for asking for equal pay. They wore white hoods, called themselves judges, and thought the law would never touch them. But one man, Bumpy Johnson, was about to show them what real justice looks like. Tonight, the air was thick with fear, the smell of old blood lingering in the concrete walls, meat hooks swaying slightly above their heads. Shadows stretched long under the single bare bulb, every flicker of light catching the terror in their eyes. The youngest of them, Johnny Walsh, barely 26, trembled as he realized the life he thought he controlled had just ended. This is the story of 2 trials. One held by men who thought they were gods, untouchable in their white robes, blind to mortality. The other held by a man who reminded them that no one, not even the most cruel, escapes the reckoning they deserve. Every lash, every kick, every life stolen would meet its echo tonight. Harlem had protectors, and Bumpy Johnson was the fiercest of them all. If you think you've heard every story about Harlem's past, think again. Because what you are about to witness is not just history, it's a reckoning, a lesson written in blood and courage that no newspaper ever printed. Harlem, 1937. The Great Depression had crushed Black America like a boot pressing down on a throat. Unemployment soared past 50%. Families lined up at soup kitchens before dawn, clutching worn bowls and empty hopes. Children went to school hungry, if they went at all. The streets of Harlem were filled with desperate faces, shopkeepers scraping by, laborers working long hours for pennies, and yet dreams persisted in the hearts of those who refused to surrender. Every corner, every building, every jazz note carried a story of struggle, resilience, and survival. The Ku Klux Klan wasn't just a southern problem anymore. Hatred and terror had spread north with the Great Migration. Northern cities like New York, Chicago, and Detroit now hosted Klan cells that operated in secret, violent, and cunning, hiding behind respectable jobs, Sunday church pews, and official badges. In the Bronx, a 15-man KKK cell met every Friday at Carlos Bar, behind locked doors, cigar smoke thick, whiskey bottles clinking, plotting and laughing, while outside, the world remained unaware. For 4 years they tortured, beat and killed without consequence. 11 victims piled up in their wake. And the police? They looked the other way, wrote it off as gang violence, and buried the truth beneath official paperwork and indifference. Tuesday, November 2nd, 1937. At a construction site in the South Bronx, Samuel Washington, Robert Bobby Jackson, and Henry Brown did something that should have been simple, ordinary human. They asked for equal pay. Same hours, same work, same effort. Yet the envelopes handed to them were thinner, the wages unfair, and the injustice obvious. For this small act of courage, they painted a target on their backs without knowing it. The white supervisors sneered, the foreman mocked, and Henry, just 19, the youngest of the 3, dared to dream of something more. He wanted to teach, to inspire, to change lives. But the world was cruel, and it moved fast to punish hope. Henry Brown was slapped across the face, humiliated in front of his peers, the sting of the hand matched only by the sting of reality. Samuel Washington was beaten, his body aching under the weight of what it meant to exist as a black man, asking for fairness in 1937 New York. Bobby Jackson, a gifted fighter with 17 amateur wins, had 3 fingers crushed, the bones shattering under the malice of men who saw strength as a threat. And Henry Brown, the smallest, the gentlest, the dreamer, would never fully recover from what came next. These 3 men stood together that day, unknowingly stepping into a storm that would change their lives forever. Friday, November 5th, 1937. Sam Washington, Bobby Jackson, and Henry Brown were walking home after a long day of labor, their bodies sore, minds tired, dreaming of dinner, sleep, and a tomorrow that promised nothing but hope. Then, a black sedan pulled up beside them, engine purring like a predator. 6 armed men stepped out, faces cold, hands gripping guns, and before the 3 could react, they were shoved inside. The doors slammed, tires squealed, and the city streets disappeared behind them. For 23 minutes they drove north, past the last streetlights, into the darkness of Pelham Bay Park, where the trees waited like silent witnesses. When the cars stopped, 8 men in white robes and hoods emerged from the shadows, torches flickering in the cold November air. The 3 young men were pulled out, forced to their knees, hands tied behind their backs, rags shoved into their mouths to stifle screams that wanted to escape. For 3 hours, the Klan tortured them. Samuel Washington whipped until his back burned with lines of fire. Bobby Jackson's fingers crushed and shattered beyond repair, the heat of a glowing brand pressed into flesh. Henry Brown, the smallest, youngest dreamer of teaching, kicked repeatedly in the head, gasping, bloodied, begging for mercy that never came. They were alive but broken, bodies and spirits scarred in ways that would last a lifetime, and in the shadows, nobody came to save them. Saturday, November 6th, 1937. A groundskeeper found Sam, Bobby and Henry near the edge of the frozen forest, huddled together, barely clinging to life. Blood stained their clothes, frost clung to their hair, their bodies twisted and broken, spirits shaken to the core. In the emergency ward at Harlem Hospital, Dr. William Carter worked tirelessly, checking vitals, wrapping wounds, praying that the youngest, Henry Brown, might survive. Samuel Washington bore lacerations across his back, shoulders dislocated, burns on his neck. Bobby Jackson's fingers were shattered, bones sticking through skin, the hand that once boxed now useless. And Henry, 19 years old, head swelling, pupils uneven, barely responsive, his dreams of teaching slipping further from his grasp. But outside the hospital, the law turned its blind eye. 2 police officers wrote notes, labeled it gang violence, and left without asking questions, without pursuing justice. The system had failed these 3 young men, especially Henry. 3 days later, on November 9th, Henry Brown died, cerebral hemorrhage. They said, murder, everyone knew, but the words were never written on paper. Harlem mourned quietly, hearts heavy with sorrow and rage, and one man, Bumpy Johnson, remembered every detail, every name, every injustice. He would not let the killers walk free, and he would make sure the law's failure was corrected in the only way it could be. Bumpy Johnson's office on 135th Street, dark wood, leather chairs, the faint smell of cigar smoke lingering in the air. Files stacked high, photographs spread across the desk, each one a story of pain, injustice, and broken lives. Harlem's protector wasn't just a gangster, he was a man who understood the value of honor, the weight of responsibility, and the cost of failure. He didn't act out of greed, fear, or revenge alone. He acted for the people, for those who had no one else to fight for them. When Clara Brown, Henry's mother, walked through that door carrying a paper bag filled with bloodied clothing and her son's Columbia application, the weight of her grief pressed on the room like a physical force. Bumpy studied the items quietly, every photograph, every stain, every note telling a story of cruelty the law refused to see. And in that silence, he made a decision. He would hold a trial for the killers, but this time it wouldn't be in the shadows, it wouldn't be ignored, and it wouldn't fail. This trial would be evidence-based, precise, unflinching, and when it was over, every man who had harmed Henry Brown and his friends would know exactly what it meant to cross Harlem and its protector. Tommy Brown, 20 years old, rage and grief burning in his eyes, held a cheap revolver, hand shaking but determined. He wanted revenge, justice for the brother he had loved, for the life stolen too soon, for Henry's dreams crushed under cruelty. Every step he took toward violence was fueled by pain, every heartbeat echoing the injustice of that frozen forest and the hands that had done it. Bumpy Johnson stepped forward calmly, slowly, his presence a wall of authority and reason. He reached out, gently took the gun from Tommy's hand, careful not to break him, careful not to let fury consume the boy. "You don't get justice, Tommy." "I do," Bumpy said quietly, patient, his eyes locked on the young man's. Tommy froze, the weight of those words settling in, grief twisting into understanding. Bumpy held up Henry's Columbia application, worn, blood-stained, filled with a dream never fulfilled. "Your brother wanted something better for you, not vengeance. You finish what he started, become a teacher, change the law, protect the next generation." Tommy's hand unclenched, tears streaming, chest heaving with the first breaths of hope since the attack. He nodded slowly, holding the application close, promising himself and his brother that the fight for justice wouldn't be in a gunshot, but in classrooms, in legislation, in hearts and minds. Henry Brown's legacy would live on through him, not through blood, but through knowledge, courage, and change. Harlem had taught its next protector, and he would rise in the way his brother never could. Friday night, November 12th, 1937. The door to Eddie Malone's slaughterhouse burst open, cigar smoke and shadows mingling with the chill of the November air. 8 men, Tony Caruso, Frank Morrison, Johnny Walsh, Patrick O'Brien, and the rest, sat tied to chairs, helpless, their white hoods now useless, their arrogance evaporating under the weight of what was coming. Meat hooks swung silently above them, the concrete floor cold, the air thick with anticipation. On the table, photographs, letters, and bloodied files told a story they couldn't escape. 11 murders, rapes, torture, and years of corruption hidden behind police badges and locked doors.